All right. Good afternoon. My name's Thomas Minnie. I'm the director of the Nature Conservancy in West Virginia, and it's my privilege to work for an organization that many of you know that conserves some of the best and most beautiful places in West Virginia. And I can guarantee that all of you have stood somewhere that we've left a legacy on the land with the help of many people in this room. Places like Bear Rocks, which Dominion has helped us conserve, or Cheat Canyon with Antero Resources. Many of the places in West Virginia, we've been able to leave an indelible mark for West Virginians with the help of people in this room. I'm also proud that we're a trusted organization that builds on the connections to convene and seat conversations on how to do what I call having it all. And that's protecting the wild and wonderful part of West Virginia, but using the power of nature to find new ways to make West Virginia and West Virginians thrive through nature-based opportunities. Nearly 10 years ago, we began a series of nature and economy conversations where we tested, are West Virginians ready for creating a vision for using the power of nature to diversify through things like clean energy and investing in those projects? And we found there was hunger to do that, and the conversations continued for this type of exploration. For the past few years, we've been very proud to be gold sponsors of the Business Summit and continue to convene and seat these conversations and discussions. And we hope these make the key connections. We hope that we can use the sessions to spur united visions for bringing business, government, and groups like TNC and West Virginians together for clean energy investments. Aside from my work for TNC and the pride I have for being able to do this, I'm a native West Virginian, a Gilmer County boy, and I'm pleased personally to bring these conversations together and allow us to find a united vision and bring investment to West Virginia. You know, I have children, and I want my children to be able to have the opportunities that keeps them here and keeps West Virginia a thriving place. So I want to thank the esteemed panel for taking time for being here today, and now introduce our moderator, West Virginia Speaker of the House, the Honorable Roger Hanschel.
Thank you, Thomas. Folks, good afternoon. We want to thank TNC for the opportunity to have an important conversation here today. You know, if you do any kind of project in West Virginia, or if you have done one recently, the conversation either begins with or soon turns toward energy. It turns toward our rich history as an energy-producing state and as a source of energy to power the manufacturing capacity of the world. But all of us who work here and live here and have business interests here understand that the national and international conversations around energy today are not what they were 10 years ago, and certainly are not what they were a generation ago. So today we have a fascinating panel. I've had the chance to spend some time preparing with them for the conversation that we're going to have today around the role of renewable energy, quote, clean energy, in a 21st century economy and in the future of West Virginia, and just discussed today how we all can shape our thinking and how external forces are shaping thinking, both internal to West Virginia and outside our state, with respect to how our economy develops and evolves. Our panel today consists of Secretary Mitch Carmichael from the West Virginia Department of Economic Development.
Thank you.
Derek Williamson, who is a member of the law firm of Spillman, Thomas & Battle and Executive Director of the West Virginia Energy Users Group.
Thank you.
Xander Bischoff, who is Head of Regulatory and Governmental Affairs for Emanate Energy, operating here in West Virginia.
Thank you.
And Rich Powell, CEO of the Clean Energy Buyers Association.
Thanks.
So, gentlemen, let's start with let's set the table. Where are we in terms of the energy economy in West Virginia, the philosophy around energy utilization and sourcing here in the state, and the perspective that each of you bring to that conversation? Rich, let's start with you.
Well, first, thank you. Thank the Nature Conservancy for arranging this discussion. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks to the Chamber for hosting this amazing event. So my organization, the Clean Energy Buyers Association, is the largest group of very large electricity consumers in the world who have pledged to buy their electricity clean. That means carbon-free. So collectively to date, we've contracted for about 84 gigawatts of clean electricity around the United States and more outside of the U.S. So that would be sort of equivalent to the third largest state just in terms of generating capacity in the country. And we're at a really, really fascinating time. So electricity growth in this country has not increased in the last 2 decades. So in most of our professional lives, we have not seen robustly growing electricity demand in this country. That changes this year. And it changes fundamentally. In 1 year, everyone's forecast of where electricity growth is going in this country has doubled for the next 10 years, since last year to this year. So that means perhaps more than 100 gigawatts of new electricity are going to have to be put onto the national grid just through 2030, and that presents an enormous economic opportunity to the states that can very rapidly deploy very large amounts of new electricity and to do it in a clean way, which is the preference of most major buyers that are driving this growth in clean energy.
Senator, how about the perspective of generating companies, developers?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks to the Nature Conservancy and the Chamber for making this happen. So yeah, Emanate Energy develops, owns, and operates over 800 clean energy projects across the U.S. That's primarily solar, but also battery energy storage. And we are developing 7 large projects in West Virginia, which, if we're able to build them all, will make up about $4 billion of investment in the state. So we're really excited to be partnering with the state to make that a reality. You know, as many of you know, West Virginia is within PJM, which is the largest wholesale market in the U.S. It's about 65 million, a population of about 65 million across 13 states and Washington, D.C. And so it's all about, you know, being competitive within the context of that market, which is a very competitive market. And so the reason we're excited about West Virginia is we think we can develop competitive projects in this state vis-a-vis, you know, your neighbors and those other 13 states that are in the market, or 12 states. So, you know, siting and permitting here we think is manageable. There's, you know, some work to be done, which we think can be done and will be done in the coming years on that front. I think there's a strong public-private partnership. We've heard a lot of folks today and in conversations we've been in who are on the government side, who are committed to an all-of-the-above, you know, open for business policy, and that's really critical for building, you know, what are ultimately challenging energy projects that require, you know, multiple levels of permits, local, state, federal level. And we think we can build these projects at a reasonable cost. West Virginia, you know, has certain sites that are large, contiguous, flat-ish land areas, which is, you know, important for a solar project. So, you know, 4 of our 7 projects are on former coal mines, and ultimately, you know, we can build pretty large projects within the context of the Eastern Interconnect, and we think compete in that way. There are definitely some challenges. There are some topographical challenges. There, you know, are some details on the property tax side where, you know, the sort of default method of the state is relatively costly within the region, but we think, you know, that can be overcome with fair pilot agreements. And, you know, there's going to definitely be a construction challenge. If, you know, we build these 7 projects all within a few years of each other, we're looking at mobilizing thousands of workers to remote areas in the state. But we think that can be overcome as well with you know, proactive, forward-thinking, working with the whole, you know, labor ecosystem to make that happen. So we think we can offer competitive, clean electrons, and, you know, we think we'll find buyers for those clean electrons, which are required to, you know, get these things financed. West Virginia is very close to a lot of eastern load centers, Data Center Alley. These customers are very hungry for clean electrons, and so we're confident that if we can get these projects built, they're going to be interested buyers to buy the electricity. So we're very excited about our prospects here, and I think we're excited about what we can do in partnership with the state when it comes to, you know, creating jobs and other economic benefits. So, you know, we move, unfortunately, at the speed of PJM. For those of you who know PJM, you know, there's a very large queue of projects that are waiting to be interconnected, and essentially we can't start construction until we get interconnection agreements. For our projects, that largely means late 2026, and, you know, leading up to that, we're working with dozens of consultants doing environmental, doing survey, et cetera. We're, once we start construction, going to be employing thousands of laborers, looking at something like $2 billion of construction spend across the state. And then once these projects are operating, you know, over, say, their 35 to 40-year lifetime, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in property tax payments, hundreds of millions of dollars in landowner lease payments, many ongoing operation and maintenance jobs. So we think there are a lot of benefits that these projects can have for the communities they're in and the state more broadly. And the last thing I'll say is just, you know, all these projects are different. Some of them have some I think, other interesting kind of co-development benefits. In some cases, you know, we're building electrical infrastructure to interconnect to the grid that we think can be used usefully for, you know, for example, an industrial load that wants to site nearby. In other cases, we're reclaiming mine lands that are not fully reclaimed and don't have bonds that are sufficient to reclaim them. So, you know, in the process of developing these solar projects, we'll be doing a lot of reclamation work that we think will benefit the state. So we're really excited to be here. That's a little bit about what we're doing and the impact we think it can have.
We have a term for those sites you describe, as Andrew, the Secretary may say in a moment. Those are West Virginia flat. Which brings us to the perspective then of large volume users. Derek, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me here. Honored to be on this panel, and I might have a couple of reactions as well. So I represent the West Virginia Energy Users Group. I also teach administrative law and energy law and policy, so some of these opinions are mine, not the organization I represent. But WVEUG, the shorthand term for it, is a group of some of the largest consumers of electricity in the state. Collectively, WVEUG members consume about 6 billion kilowatt hours a year, which is about 15% of all the electricity consumed in the state. They pay over $500 million in electric charges to AEP and First Energy in West Virginia. And then, of course, on the flip side, they provide thousands of jobs, tens of millions of dollars in annual payroll, hundreds of millions of dollars in other economic contributions. But over time, the percentage paid for electricity has just grown considerably. And Xander mentioned PJM, that's the 13-state region in which West Virginia resides. Many of those states have competition or customer choice for electricity, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and to some degree Virginia as an example. While West Virginia remains a monopoly regulated state, so the Public Service Commission, and acknowledgement to PSC Chairman Lane, who's here this afternoon, the Public Service Commission regulates those rates. So from an end user perspective, we obviously want as much downward pressure as possible on electricity, so we'll litigate cases at the PSC for that purpose. But we also want all options on the table when it comes to energy supply. We also believe that competition is usually the best way to get to the lowest plausible price for power. But that has changed. I was looking at some numbers, and of course we're coming in to a quarter of a century. And in the last quarter of a century, the electric rates in West Virginia have increased by 260%. In the last 5 years, they've increased by about 50%. And whereas West Virginia, and this is a contextual point that's necessary for this discussion, by the way, we need to understand the starting point and what incremental costs will do. Latest EIA, Energy Information Administrative data that came out on Monday, shows that West Virginia ranks for large manufacturing and industrial consumers 22nd in terms of the lowest rate to pay. We used to be top 5 lowest rate consistently until about 15 years ago. And if you drill down a little further, the AEP rate as of this September 1st will be 8.51 cents. That would rank 28th if we inserted them in that queue, higher than Ohio, higher than Kentucky, higher than Pennsylvania, higher than the Carolinas. Conversely, First Energy's rate's a little lower and should be stable for the next couple of years. They would rank 15th. And all of that is to say that we need to understand the starting point with respect to these issues. I'd say about half of our membership, maybe a little more, want to have a green product. They want to have renewable power and clean energy in their portfolio. Usually that's driven by the financial markets and their customers. And so they're trying to please the financial markets and please their customers, so they want those options. The state's done a great job bringing in new business. Nucor, Berkshire Hathaway, and Temet form energy. But for existing customers to access renewable supplies, they can't go to the wholesale market about which Xander was speaking. They can't seek through customer choice to acquire those types of assets. The only thing they could do, they could theoretically enter into what's called a virtual power purchase agreement, but that's simply a financial instrument. They're not really buying green power. So they're left to do one of two things. They can build renewable power on site. That's cost prohibitive. Or they can get it from AEP or First Energy. But the offerings available to AEP and First Energy are very limited, and for the most part fully subscribed. So there's really not much left for them to do. And we need to address that question, because retention of existing business is just as important as attracting new business. And then one thing that Rich talked about, another contextual point, is the looming crisis that we have with respect to electric power. He's right. 5 years ago, nobody had projections that included the behemoth data centers that are coming online, particularly in this area, in Virginia, in potentially the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. The collective load of WVEUG as a group is about 1,000 megawatts, if anybody knows what that means. Weirton Steel in its heyday was about 300 megawatts. Practically speaking, a single load data center location could be a 500 megawatt customer. And so those weren't accounted for 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when fossil fuel plants were retiring and we were bringing intermittent renewable resources online. Most recently, PJM had what's called a capacity auction. They need to plan for how much generation production is going to be available. And the prices for capacity in that auction increased by 800%, and that's planning for 2025 and 2026. The market signal that sends is build generation production capacity. I saw recently that Calpine indicated that it intends to build a natural gas-fired power plant, and they're looking at Ohio and Pennsylvania. And why they're not looking at West Virginia is something else that we need to look at. But the bottom line is both First Energy and AEP will become capacity short. First Energy probably sooner than AEP, but they'll become capacity short. And then the question becomes, well, how do we meet that capacity need? And is there a way that ties in with this panel, green power, clean power, that can help us offset the need for AEP and First Energy to build their own power plants or to purchase through the wholesale market? Last thing, because I have prattled on a good bit. I was inspired by the video there, but immediately I started. I've been doing this for 30 years, despite my youthful appearance. But it immediately caused me to think about, how does that tie in to energy? I think that it's obvious. Everybody in this room knows that West Virginia is, by fact, an energy state, but we haven't tapped into that. And so not only do we want to have all options on the table, but I think the things we're talking about in this panel and some other issues, provide a discussion point and potentially a vehicle, for us to truly have that boundless energy associated with West Virginia and have an all options on the table future.
Mr. Secretary, you and I have had this conversation before, but energy options is a part of your job.
Yes.
Speak about that.
Okay, thank you. And again, thanks to the Nature Conservancy for sponsoring this forum. And I just wanted to point out to my good friend Derek here, though, that he introduces Chairwoman Lane of the PSC and then talks about how high rates are for your...
Notwithstanding the most excellent job that she has done in reining in those rates.
But every conversation, Mr. Speaker, in our recruitment efforts for West Virginia's economy starts and ends with energy. Energy is the key component to providing manufacturing jobs, data center jobs. Every job now relates back to the energy portfolio that West Virginia is able to provide. And I think everyone would agree that we have, by any measure, have really set this state on fire in terms of economic development. And so we're continuing those efforts, and it really does boil down to the availability of energy. And many, many times, customers want, demand, and see an advantage to renewable energies. And one of the things that, as you said, Mr. Speaker, we talk about often is we lean into the fact that we are an historic energy state. And this state has a great heritage in all the fossil fuel industries. And, you and I are fond of the phrase that, West Virginia has mined the coal, that forged the steel, that built the bridge, that carried the truck, that won the wars. And so we need to think about that historic, heritage that we have. But in the process of creating a 21st century economy, we need to lean into the availability and the new technologies of renewable energies. And we're seeing that bring forth many benefits to West Virginia in terms of Berkshire Hathaway, TimeEt, Form Energy. These are great companies that are providing incredible jobs for our citizens, and I'm convinced that what people really want is a great job with a good wage and a fantastic future. And I think what we have and what we're doing now in embracing the past and leaning into the future is providing that hope and opportunity for our citizens.
We do from time to time hear that, embrace of non-fossil technology or non-fossil options is an abandonment of our historic heritage here in West Virginia. Let's talk about the extent to which pressure for alternative sources is imposed upon us from external sources. Derek, let's start
I
with
do
you.
want to respond on that fossil fuel point first. I'm not sure that's exactly what your question was.
I think it is.
Yeah, so because of what has been discussed here in the introductions, this load issue that is occurring, and notwithstanding a recent complaint, Chairman, from the Sierra Club, the existing coal-fired power plants in West Virginia are in a good position. Now, you never know what can happen in terms of, federal level regulation and oversight, but all things being equal, those plants, Mountaineer, Amos, Mitchell, Fort Martin, Harrison, those are the 5 sites where coal-fired power plants are owned by AEP and First Energy in West Virginia. They should be in good shape going forward. They will need to be leaned upon over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not just because of the load growth, it's because that has been coupled with multiple fossil fuel plants retiring, being replaced to the extent there's new power online with intermittent resources that can't meet the capacity needs that will be occurring in the volume that they're occurring, because the interconnection queue for new resources at PJM is epically slow, because we need new transmission infrastructure, and that costs money that consumers have to pay. So for all of those reasons, the heritage of coal-fired power in West Virginia is not going anywhere anytime soon, in my opinion. I think all of those plants have projected lives out to about 2040, and I think that those are pretty sound projections. So, to answer your question, the idea of pursuing another avenue, of another option on the table through clean power partnerships and renewable power sleeved through the utility or however may occur is not a threat to that heritage. In fact, I would argue that it is embracing that heritage because West Virginia is an energy state.
Rich, I want to turn specifically now to the question of, is it always a choice, or are these shifts in power supply or generation mix imposed externally?
I can talk about our companies.
Sure.
And so the SEBA companies represent about $15 trillion in market cap. If you consume more than 0.1% of American electricity, you're probably one of our members. If you consume more than 1% of American electricity, you're probably on our board. And for a variety of reasons, our companies have made commitments to buy clean electricity. Some of those things stem from closely or strongly held beliefs of their founders and management about the kind of carbon footprint their companies want to have. Some of those come from pressure from their investors. Some of those come from pressures from their business partners and suppliers. So, Nucor, right, builds a lot of data centers for a lot of my other members that operate data centers. And those folks running the data centers want Nucor to be supplying clean steel to them. So there's now a network of preferences and pressure points in all of these companies to buy clean electricity at scale as they build. And it has become quite real. So collectively, this market signal now, frankly, vastly outstrips the supply of electricity available, and yet the demand is still there and is still moving. And it's actually driving a number of our companies to a lot of really interesting new solutions. So they've started to really expand how they think about carbon-free power. They've started to procure geothermal energy, for example, in the Southwest. And just this week, Meta announced a new deal to buy geothermal east of the Rocky Mountains, which will be a first with new technology that enables it in new places. A number of my members broke the ice on nuclear this year and started to procure nuclear energy or announced that they were going to procure nuclear energy, some of that from existing nuclear power plants like in Pennsylvania, some of that with intentions to build new nuclear power plants, either grid connected or maybe even on the site of their facilities around the country. And many of them are open to carbon capture, either using hydrogen produced from natural gas, made clean through carbon capture, or carbon capture on the site of a fossil power plant or a biomass power plant. Some of our members have actually bought BECCS energy in Europe, so that's bioenergy with carbon capture. It's actually carbon negative power. It's a really interesting opportunity and a potential way to refire coal-fired power plants with a new fuel source that actually makes it into a carbon negative asset. So the message I'd say is this demand signal is very real. This preference is very, very real. People are making decisions on where to site new facilities based on where new clean power at huge scale is available and available economically. They've got a lot of flexibility about where they can site these things. The newest generation of data centers, particularly the ones that are going to be used for AI training, have much lower latency requirements than the last generation of data centers. A reason that so many data centers were headquartered in Virginia and Data Center Alley is the kinds of data centers that are used to deliver streaming or the email to everybody's devices as you're looking at literally need to be close to other data centers in order to have as low latency and as best an experience as you can for the end consumer. But if what you're actually doing is giving a massive AI model to a data center to basically train an AI, that actually doesn't have to be in a low latency environment. It can be sited anywhere. And so folks are looking at locations all over the country wherever they could site very, very large amounts of clean energy very, very quickly. The very last thing I'll say about this is some of these loads are absolutely massive. And so you mentioned, some of these data centers are now increasing to the size of 500 megawatts. I have multiple members who are talking about data center campuses at the gigawatt or multi-gigawatt scale. So there is an announced data center campus under development that would be a 5-gigawatt data center. So again, the opportunity, and that would be a $100 billion investment, whoever captures that location, right? So the opportunity is massive for, frankly, whichever states are well positioned to move quickly on deploying very large amounts of clean energy at scale.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to flesh that out just a second, if I could.
Okay.
So, Rich talked about, bringing in the investment to new manufacturing and new industry. And so, the question becomes, from my perspective, but what do we do about the existing load in West Virginia that wants to partake in the clean energy take as a function of their customer preference or better positioning in the financial market, whatever it may be. And right now, as I mentioned, all they can do is develop on-site generation that they fund, which is cost prohibitive. The state did a remarkable job through Mitch speaker and others with special session legislation to bring the Berkshire Hathaway investment to Ravenswood in Jackson County. What that does is it allows a third party to come in, invest, build, and operate battery storage and solar in order to serve the Temet facility. And the commission recently approved a contract associated with that for backup power, very promptly, by the way. But that special session legislation only provides that third-party ownership operation feature for new customers, not replacing existing load, only for added load. And it's limited to 2 sites at this point in time. That doesn't do anything for the existing customer. And so we need to think about how we can take advantage of the opportunity of the fact that both utilities in the state, AEP and First Energy, are going to need more capacity. And rather than have them build themselves and burden all ratepayers, we should be thinking about a law that would allow third-party ownership and operation behind the meter for existing customers to meet these needs.
Xander, I want to turn to the generation side of the conversation now for a minute. Talk to the room a bit about the development strategy from the perspective of generators of these sources.
Absolutely. So we are, at the end of the day, serving our customers. We're customer-driven, and the question is, where can we provide cheap, affordable, clean power that is valued by the customer, which is typically to say it's close to the customer's load, which means that it's a more effective sort of tool for the customer to hedge their energy costs. And West Virginia is really well positioned to serve that function for Data Center Alley and well beyond that. So then again, the question becomes, can we do that cost effectively and really compete? To the earlier conversation, we're looking at immense load growth. The PJM capacity market is saying we need more capacity. If West Virginia doesn't provide it, another state will. And so, in that regard, I think West Virginia does well on a lot of fronts, and that's why we're here. Again, we found large tracts of West Virginia flat sites without, other obvious use cases. And we also are able to interconnect, we think, at a reasonable price and on a reasonable timeline, because West Virginia has one of the best electrical grids in the PJM region, if not the best. So we can get the power from point A to the customer at point B, cost effectively and in a timely fashion. And again, I think public-private partnership is going to be key here. We need to get these projects permitted and sited in a timely fashion. And what we've seen to date in West Virginia is there's a lot of buy-in from public officials, from government officials to do that. And in the next few years, we hope to see that translated into reality. So we're really encouraged. The reason we came to West Virginia is because we like those characteristics. We're encouraged by what we've seen to date. And I think, we will be able to deliver power to these customers who are demanding it. The last thing I'll add, just tying back to, a prior conversation there, is in addition to solar, we did just see a kind of historically high capacity market price. That is really reflective of this load growth that people have been talking about. And, frankly, PJM's commentary over the last year or two, where they've said, we're looking out 3-4 years and we think we might have a shortfall in capacity. So the prices reflect that. I think, in addition to solar, a lot of developers like ourselves are looking at the option to add storage to these sites, which can provide some of that capacity that the system needs so badly. And I think not only are we seeing that on the capacity market side, but we're seeing it on the customer side. Nucor, Microsoft, and Google recently ran a request for proposals looking for essentially a clean energy product that matched their demand, say 50 to 80% of the hours of the year. And really, to do that, you can't just have solar, you can't just have wind, you need a storage component to move the energy around to where it's needed. So I think you have a convergence of factors here where we're hopeful that, a lot of these new clean energy facilities will also have a storage component that will meet customer needs and will meet PJM's needs.
Mr. Secretary, looks like you've got a response.
Well, just more of an opportunity to brag on West Virginia with those comments, because when you think about, here we sit in a state with this historical fossil fuel extraction industries and has been great for our state and great for America, great for the world. And yet, we sit in a state with what I'm told is among the very few, if not the only, microgrid system in America with powering an industrial facility with largely renewable power. So in this fossil fuel state, we have this microgrid powering the world's most advanced titanium smelting plant for the aerospace industry in the heart of West Virginia. And then in addition to that, as we're talking about being able to store renewable energy, we have among the world's best form energy battery storage, long-term battery storage components, all within this small, beautiful state that has all these great resources. And so when we take this, the title of this segment is Catalyzing West Virginia's Economy through clean energy investment, and that's what we're doing here. That in spades we're doing it here with this microgrid powering these great jobs, then being able to store this energy with a company that's located in Weirton, West Virginia. By the way, the Department of Energy just did this program in which 5 northeastern states decided, they were going to put forth, I don't know, it's either 100 or 1,000 megawatt storage components. And those batteries, to store that, will be made right here in West Virginia. So we are doing every segment of this economy. And when we go to the marketplace and try to recruit companies to come here, how can you beat that value proposition of knowing you've got available energy, you can have it in renewable or traditional, and you can store it, and it can all be made here in West Virginia. We have companies that are powering buses, green power motor companies here, I see, and other components of this renewable sector, in addition to all the other advantages that we bring. So we should feel good about this. We're in a good spot, and we're going to continue to do even better.
So I think every panelist up here today mentioned some connection to PJM. Let's talk for just a minute about whether we have the capacity, and by capacity I mean ability, not technical capacity, the ability to bring on the kind of generation that the market demands in a timely manner. Xander, let's start with you. As a developer.
Yeah, well, certainly PJM is a long pole in the tent. So, we've got these projects, we've got land, we'd be ready to go get these things permitted next year, but, they move at the speed of PJM. So, no question about it. They have made recent reforms to their interconnection process, and, we're seeing them make progress there, and they've started to implement those reforms, and things are moving reasonably well and on schedule. So we are hopeful that, that over time we're going to dig out of this kind of congested queue situation that we're in and bring power online quicker. But the fact is today there's a large backlog, and they are kind of running through their process to dig out, which will mean, a new project submitted today still won't be studied until early 2026 and won't get an interconnection agreement until almost 2 years later. So even if I had a good idea, I could not get that project to a point of having an interconnection agreement until almost 2028. And, after that, maybe it takes a couple of years to build. So it's not going to be solved overnight, but we are seeing progress. And then, there are other reforms they're looking at on the transmission planning side, which may be helpful. The good news is West Virginia does have this amazing electrical grid, which means, generally speaking, we think when you get through the interconnection queue, you will be able to interconnect reasonably quickly, and you won't have to wait for large, what we call network upgrades to the system, which, if I'm trying to connect in Illinois, I'm certainly going to get one. It's going to take 5 years to build a new substation, and that's going to push my timeline out even further. So it's definitely not a solved issue, but I think West Virginia is in relatively good shape compared to other states to have timely interconnection and project construction thereafter.
Rich, let's get the perspective of your members on that.
Yep. So I'll just say quickly, this is a huge opportunity. So there are literally hundreds of gigawatts of projects in the queue in PJM alone. Nationwide, in all of the interconnect queues, there's more than 2.5 terawatts of projects, so 2,500 gigawatts of projects. Theoretically, if we just built all the projects that were already lined up asking to build around the country, we would have made a huge contribution to all the new energy we need. And the vast majority of what's in those queues, by the way, is clean. And this point about transmission is so important. So, I think today, West Virginia hugely benefits from having strong transmission with additional resources and ability to import and export from the state. Over time, though, a real issue in these queues is simply lack of transmission capacity, both within the existing RTO, so like within a PJM, and then inter-regional transmission, so transmission that would connect MISO and SPP with PJM and other power pools around the country, and figuring out how we as a country sustainably and rapidly build large amounts of high-voltage, long-distance transmission, which lets us take advantage of as many of these opportunities to access as much clean energy as cheaply as possible around the country and deliver it reliably all over the country and avoid grid outages and deal with the increasingly extreme weather we're seeing. That is just an enormous opportunity. Unfortunately, we're just at the beginning of that opportunity. So FERC made a really big decision earlier this year called FERC Order 1920. Each of the RTOs, including PJM, now has to figure out how it's going to implement that order, and they're going to have to start to do very long-term, thoughtful plans for how they're going to build enormous amounts of new transmission, regional transmission within each of the regions, how they're going to permit it, how they're going to plan for it, and how they're going to pay for it. And they have to do this cost allocation process as well. This is something that everyone should be paying attention to, because the upside, if we can build large amounts of transmission, we can do it quickly and affordably. The upside in terms of energy affordability and energy reliability will be massive for businesses across all of these regions.
Derek, as we think about PJM, how does that impact the thinking of your large volume users?
So your question, I think these two really covered the issue well. It creates timing issues for investment, of course, because of the issues that they have described. But it also, for me, highlights, and now I'm going to make up to Chairman Lane, Mr. Secretary, I think it highlights some of the advantages that West Virginia has. We do have a mature, large, meaning 500 kV and above, transmission system in West Virginia. Obviously, because it's West Virginia flat, there are challenges getting from the 500 kV level down to a sub-transmission level or a primary and secondary transmission level. And the Public Service Commission about 2 years ago issued an order laying out the procedures it would utilize for expansion and replacement of transmission lines for AEP and First Energy, and they have addressed and promptly approved, judiciously of course, multiple transmission line projects for AEP and First Energy, some of which were beneficial to clients I was representing independently. And then with respect to, there is this queue with respect to new generation production at PJM, and I have mentioned that AEP and First Energy have limited availability through their tariff with renewable projects, but the Commission has promptly approved applications for certification for solar plants and wind power plants, not those owned necessarily by AEP or First Energy, but from other independent, what are called exempt wholesale generators that serve in the PJM market. So I think the issues with PJM highlight something that's enticing about West Virginia is that the regulatory environment from the perspective of regulatory review and approval has actually worked very, very efficiently.
We're down to 4 minutes now left in our time available for our panel. I want to give each one of our panelists a time to offer some closing comments here, but I'd ask that you do it through the lens of what do you believe the future to be for clean energy writ large, but specifically for the economy of the state of West Virginia as we think about creating and growing a 21st century economy here. Rich, let's start with you.
One thing we haven't talked about is local community support for new projects, and this is so important. Across the country, we've seen new build for a lot of clean energy projects really, really challenged by support for local communities. And in many places, that's because these are places that aren't energy states. They're not accustomed to energy development. They're not accustomed to industrial development. On the other hand, states and places that are accustomed to this, right, that are energy states, that know the value of being hosts for large energy and industrial projects, they can really capture a lot of the benefits for those things. So if you think about West Virginia as a place where you've got a really energy literate community that's going to be welcoming of new development and understand the upside, understand what that means for jobs for their communities and tax base for their communities, jobs for their kids, opportunities for education, I think that this state just stands so strongly to benefit from all of this new opportunity and could really capture, far greater than your land footprint share or your population share. I think you could capture far greater than that of the economic opportunity and upside in all this new development.
Xander?
Yeah, I think there's an immense opportunity here, not only on the energy side, but also on the ecosystem that, Rich and others have talked so well about, that arises around that. So there's a lot of solar, there's a lot of storage in the PJM queue in West Virginia. And, executing on that, I think, will mean bringing a lot of economic benefit to the state, keeping energy prices low, and also being more compelling in the pitch that West Virginia makes to, corporations to cite their projects in the state. So I think the open for business, message and all the above energy message is really being heard by companies like mine. It's convinced us that, this is a good prospect to invest up to $4 billion in, which is more than we're spending in any other state. And now it's a matter of executing on that. I think, what Chairman Lane has done on the CPCN side is a great example of making it truly open for business and easier to develop in, and that is extremely valuable and reduces the cost for developers like us, and the timeline, which is really important. I think going beyond that, there's a lot of good work that can be done to streamline other elements of the permitting process. I think because we're early on in terms of developing solar in the state, there's not fit-for-purpose permits in certain cases, for example, for stormwater that can also help to improve the development environment. So I think continuing to kind of not get complacent and look for areas where we can really make the state more open for business will lead to the many gigawatts and billions of dollars that are in the queue coming to fruition, and hopefully, the sort of next generation of technologies also coming to the state, whether that's Form Energy or, not obviously their factory is here, but in terms of batteries connected to the grid or another type of alternative energy.
Okay, Derek?
So to answer your question, it's here to stay. And it's really about, technological development, cash, but seizing the opportunities that the state has because of how well positioned it is to advance this area of the energy market. Inside West Virginia, there are things we can do that I view as solutions. You mentioned the Secretary rightly is proud of Form Energy, Nucor, and the Berkshire Hathaway project. All of those, I'm happy to bash AEP and First Energy. I get paid to do that, and it is enjoyable quite often. But they worked hand in hand with those companies. Both of those utilities worked hand in hand with those companies to make sure that they would invest in West Virginia. But we need to do the same thing for the customers that are here right now. And those customers need options as well with respect to clean energy. And there are solutions out there. Let's advance legislation that allows third-party ownership and operation behind the meter for existing customers. As we have capacity needs, let's see that gets fulfilled by them rather than turning to the two utilities to make investments that all customers have to pay. We can ring-fence those costs inside the meter. Other states, Louisiana, has what's called sleeving. It allows the utility to go out into the market for a specific large customer and acquire renewable power for that customer. It doesn't cost anybody else on their system anything. It's sleeving to serve that customer who wants that renewable power. Dominion in Virginia, the electric power company in Virginia, has a tariff that accomplishes the same thing. It effectively is a sleeving option for their large customers who want power. Duke Energy in North Carolina has an MOU with Nucor and Amazon, Microsoft, and one other, and that's for them to explore joint ventures where they come up with creative financial arrangements in order to build renewable and green power. And then NV Energy in Nevada has an agreement in place with Google to build a geothermal project that Google will pay for. No other customers will be impacted by that at all. And all of those things emphasize the role that the utilities here could also play in seizing those creative opportunities so that we can be part of, I think, an initiative toward energy, clean energy and renewable power that's only going to grow over time. It's just going to grow over time over a much longer process than the original advocates had hoped.
Mr. Secretary, the title of this panel is Catalyzing West Virginia's Economy Through Clean Energy Investment. So that's your job. Bring it home.
That's it. And so we've spent many years, last decade, reforming West Virginia's business climate and making it a great place to live, work, raise a family, and to create great jobs and invest capital. This next evolution, this is our moment in time, I believe. This is an inflection point in West Virginia's history. We can either hold on to the past and bury our head in the sand about the transformation that's occurring, or we can embrace our past, continue to honor that past, and to recognize how valuable it is, and lean into the future. And I think as we market West Virginia to the world, when we embrace the renewable energy components, when we recruit companies that have a renewable energy element, it sends a message not just to internally, but externally to the world that we are truly open for business and we are willing to embrace new technologies, new opportunities, and new growth that will, in fact, catalyze West Virginia's economy and lift it to the next level. And I think, everyone in this room, Mr. Speaker, you no more so than you, have been a great advocate for West Virginia and the changes that have been necessary to make this moment occur. Now, let's lean into the clean energy environment. Let's do things. Let's not just wait on PJM interconnection agreements. Let's find ways to do the microgrids or the behind-the-meter things that can help continue the growth that we're experiencing and continue to charge into the future. So thank you, and it's been an honor to be on this panel with these great folks.
All right, with that, folks, let's thank our panel. Appreciate your attendance here at this panel this afternoon. Let's thank the Nature Conservancy again for their sponsorship of today's program. Have a great evening.